All right, guys. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome. I told you I had a great interview, and I would not let you down. I told you that I was going to have Marilyn Hughes on, and I'm not a liar. And I got a bonus for you. I got Cap with me in the studio. Cap, what's going on, buddy?
Just hanging out in the studio, Casey. What's going on with you?
Well, I mean, we got Marilyn Hughes. I mean, I know you've talked to her a bunch of times. She's that amazing author, and she talks about the out-of-body, and she's got the Out-of-Body Travel Foundation. You know what I'm talking about, right?
A number of things she does.
Yeah, she's incredible.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk today about this book that she has. She's written so many different books, but the one that we're going to talk about today is Comparative Religious Mystical Theology, Out-of-Body Travel and World Religions. And then we're also going to get some insight on this great woman, because she will be in Simply Amazing Women, the book, when it comes out. And we're doing some editing now. And Cap, let's get her on the air. So, with no further ado, guys, it is my pleasure to bring to WMAP Miss Marilyn Hughes. Marilyn, what's going on?
Hey, I'm sitting here talking to you guys, and it's great to talk to both of you at the same time. This is fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, Cap has done such a great job with you. I've heard those interviews, and we've talked a bunch of times. So.
Oh yeah, she's been great.
Yeah,
she's been great. It's fun to talk to her.
She is. Cap. So Marilyn Hughes, she's on the air now, and this latest book. Why don't you tell Marilyn, about the latest book? It's not the latest, but it's the one we're going to talk about today. It's Comparative Religious Mystical Theology, Out-of-Body Travel and World Religions. Why don't you start by talking about that?
Well, this book is an interesting book that I did, and it was based on the fact that it's a very interesting phenomenon or idea to sit, like at the foot of a master and listen to them speak. And so I searched and scoured through the ancient sacred texts of all the world religions to find documents from every religious tradition that I could that were like in a dialogue format with some of the greatest mystics from every tradition. So, from the ancient Egyptian, ancient Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, etc., where someone is speaking to the mystic and asking them about not only their mystical experience, but the actual mystical theology of their tradition, because each tradition is quite different, but at the same time, there are so many similarities, which is one of the things that makes this compendium quite interesting to me as the writer of it,
Yeah. Now, can you tell the audience, in case they don't know, what is, when you say a mystic? Can you talk about what that is?
Yeah, and I think that's real important. A mystic is a person who has an unusual calling in that they have a spiritual gift wherein they have what some may call out-of-body experiences, some may call mystical experiences. We've had thousands of them throughout time, whether it's Rumi from the Sufi Islamic tradition, or St. Catherine of Siena, who was a Catholic mystic, or Maitreya, the Buddhist Maitreya. We even have mystics all the way back into ancient Egypt. We have Zoroastrian mystics. Native American mystics as well. And these are people who are gifted with this spiritual anomaly wherein they would have unexpected experiences taken out of their body spiritually. They would speak to heavenly beings. They would be given instruction about the purpose of life, about the mystical realities beyond this life, and then they are returned to their body, and then they, a lot of times that's kind of their calling, their vocation in life is to kind of bring wisdom from the worlds beyond the human realm below, so to speak.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah,
it really is fascinating.
So Marilyn, who would you say are some of the great mystics included in this book?
Well, for one, Jacob Boehme, who is a Christian mystic. Many people have heard of him. He wrote things like the Aurora, the Signature of All Things. There's also mystics like Rumi. Rumi was an Afghanistan mystic. Ironically, about 800 years ago, people forget that, in light of things that are happening in the world today, what a great mystical tradition occurred in that area of the world. hundreds and hundreds of years ago. He was one of the first great Sufi mystics, which is, the Sufis are the mystic tradition of the Islamic path. We also have Guru Nanak, who pretty long time ago, but he was the founder of the Jains. We have Rabbi Simeon, who was one of the rabbis in the early Kabbalistic era.
I'm sorry, what is that, Marilyn? Can you tell me what that, I don't mean to stop you, but in case there's a term that I don't understand or the audience might not, what was that term you just used?
The Kabbalistics, which, that's a good question. The Kabbalistics were the mystical arm of Judaism.
Oh, okay.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
huh?
yeah, that's something I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so, in every world religious tradition, there is a mystical arm, believe it or not. And so it's such a fascinating journey because, in reality, it is the mystical arm of the faith that has always informed the doctrines of the faith, because every faith was born of a revelational experience, an out-of-body experience. I have another book that I wrote that covers that part of it, which is called Near-Death and Out-of-Body Experiences of the Prophets, Saints, Mystics, and Sages in World Religions, which kind of gives you the birth points of these major religions: Islam, Christianity, the Native Americans, Buddhism, mystery religions, Hinduism. But here we're going into some of these great mystics, like Imam Ghazali is another one who was a great Sufi mystic, and in fact he wrote one of the greatest mystical theologies of Islam, which is very comparable to one of the greatest mystical theologies that you find in Catholicism. Very interesting stuff. And also Baha'u'llah, founder of the Baha'i faith, was a profound mystic. And so what's interesting about this particular take on it is we're trying to put the reader into the guise of literally sitting at the feet and learning as if they're in dialogue with these mystical masters, because there's so much to learn, and we're very lucky that these ancient sacred texts were written down like they were.
Wow, it's really clever how you use that particular format to get at the readers.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I can't take credit for it because most of my ideas just kind of come to me. But yeah, it's a way to really bring to life these things that have been left for us. There was one thing I was going to just read to you from just one little paragraph that I thought would be an interesting little exercise here.
Yeah, please.
Because in all of my interviews I've talked about how what has been revealed to me is the path of purification, and how we are here to go through an intrusive self-examination and the path of purification. And I'm going to read this to you, and I'm not going to tell you which religion it comes from, and we're just going to have a little guessing game because it's so amazing. So, here we go. Thus, only according to that primeval creed could man fulfill his marvelous destiny, and thus only can that destiny accomplish his heart's desire. No skill in the secrets of the material universe, no dominion over the forces of life and death, no power to pierce the veil which hangs before the unseen world and to hold communion with the spiritual intelligences will satisfy his secret aspirations. For the soul of man, so every form of creed declares, can know no rest, nor can his spirit ever be satisfied, so long as the thinnest film remains to interrupt the unclouded vision of the hidden love, until he stand face to face and eye to eye with him who knows the depths. Now, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but just throw out a couple of guesses. What religion do you think that might have come from?
Cap. I'm going to go with Catholicism, Christianity, and what are you going to go with?
I was going to say Catholicism as well.
Are we right?
Okay, well, let me tell you, that's ancient Egypt.
Oh. Wow.
And the reason I wanted to kind of give you that little interesting pop there is because this is surprising, isn't it?
It is.
And the reason why it's important now then becomes we're starting to see that the mystics have all seen the same thing.
Oh, I see.
Time.
Okay.
They've seen the same things from the beginning of time, and this purification pathway was being revealed to all these mystics, even from ancient Egypt.
Wow, so we played right into your hand, didn't we?
Yes, you did. But I'm sorry. I knew that was kind of a trick.
No. You proved your point, and I love that, guys. We're speaking with Marilyn Hughes. It's me and Capriana. We're speaking with Marilyn Hughes, and Marilyn Hughes, of course, is in the book "Simply Amazing Women," which will be out. We'll let you know when. She's also the out-of-body travel author, the founder of the Out-of-Body Travel Foundation. You go to her website, which is outofbodytravel.org, and this latest book, the one that we're talking about, is called that's not the one. What's the whole name? It's the long name.
Comparative Religious
Right.
Mystical Theology, and it's out-of-body travel in world religion.
Got it. One
It's
more
a
time.
mouthful. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Can you say it one more time?
Comparative Religious Mystical Theology, out-of-body travel in world religion.
Okay. And let me just go back here for a second, Marilyn. For some people that may not have heard you, this might be their first time, can you just go back to the basic, what is the out-of-body travel? What is that exactly? I know it's a question we've asked you a million times, but just in case people are just tuning in.
Sure. Out-of-body travel is when you experience your spirit separating from the body, and you begin a journey that involves this purification of the soul that we've just discussed. But it starts out with this process that involves the separation of the spirit from the body. It happens in a large variety of ways. Some people will first start by experiencing vibrations. Most people will experience this if they put out an intention, and they do a lot of practices, meditation, prayer, things like this. But there are people who will experience it spontaneously, and so they will kind of like be kind of thrown into it, and then want to find out what it is. So it can happen either way. But when it happens to people, it's usually very much, it's a very powerful experience. It's not something where you'll question, was this an out-of-body experience or not? It will be so powerful that you'll have no doubt that this is what happened to you. And, a lot of times people think that they have died because they're experiencing their soul outside of their body. And then they realize once they go back and return that it's more of an out-of-body experience. So there is a similarity between the near-death experience and out-of-body experience.
Wow, that's interesting. I was talking to Capriana before the interview, and I was telling her that one thing I really wanted to know was I heard that after you wrote this book, you had one of the most important out-of-body experiences that you can talk about. Is that true?
Well, it was a very important one, and I was very happy to have it because I had a beautiful experience with St. Padre Pio, who is a Catholic saint now. He died in 1968, and a lot of Catholics are familiar with him. He had the wounds of the stigmata. He was a very holy man, and I had seen him many times before, and those who read my books are familiar with the fact that he was pretty rough on me because I kind of needed it. I needed a lot of guidance, and he was very pleased with me after I finished writing this book and another book that I wrote around the same time, which was called Forgotten Mystics. And apparently these two books were really important, and he was very pleased with me, and he gave me a big hug. I saw him in this beautiful, brightly lit room. There was a confessional to our left, and he was wearing his brown monk's robe, had this beautiful white light all around him, and it was just such a wonderful, embracing moment for me. And because, we had gone through so much together in terms of, he had to correct me a lot. And so to receive his approval and know that he was happy with this was a big deal for me at that time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's pretty incredible. But the one thing I wanted to ask you is, you have these out of body experiences all the time, and the only thing I can wrap my brain around is, how sometimes if you go on vacation or something like that, and you come back and you kind of miss where you were or people you were with. Does that happen with an out of body experience? Do you miss where you were? Wish you could go back?
Oh yes. So much so, and even more so than like a vacation or something, because some of the places that I go to are just so, the heavenly realms are just a very different experience than what we have here. It's a higher vibration as well. It's not just that it's more beautiful, because there is a great deal of beauty on the earth. One of the things you experience as you go through these processes, you become more aware of all the beauty that you're not seeing on Earth. Mm-hmm. But it's not just that it's more beautiful, but it is. But but it's also that the energy. It's this upliftment. It's this unconditional love. It's this wisdom and knowledge that all the beings are moving within and through. You miss that so much. Yes, there really is that, very much so. Yeah, I have a lot of places that just fly through my mind right now that I'm like, gosh, I wish I were there, and there.
It's so interesting, Marilyn. I mean, we could talk to you for hours, but if you could tell our listeners, if you could pick one of those places, I mean, here's a strange question, but Jesus has never popped up, has he?
Oh, many times.
Oh,
yes.
Wow. Oh, let's hear about this.
Oh, okay. Well, I've had a lot of experiences with him, and Capriana might remember I had a big experience when I had my near-death encounter with Christ. Oh, that's right.
Yep. Yeah, I remember that. Okay.
Yes, and but he also started a lot of the journey that I took in the third, that was written about in the Mysteries of the Redemption, which was begun when he came, ironically, with the Buddha. They came together, and they told me to retrieve the ancient sacred texts and all the ancient prayer books. And that was like 25, 30 years ago. I don't even remember how long now. And he had me start looking into these ancient sacred texts. And then I started having many beautiful experiences where I was taken into the different energies of what the Christ energy is and what the Buddha energy was. And I remember that the Buddha energy was like wonderment, truth, and humility. And of course, the Christ energy was filled with this transformative spirit and awe. I was given a lot of really beautiful adventures in that I was allowed to go back and observe, like, the Last Supper occurring.
Oh, my God.
I went through the time and went back and was allowed to watch the time before and kind of listen into what people were saying before and what happened just shortly thereafter. I was taken into a place in the heavens where the crucifixion, the elements of the crucifixion are actually kind of kept as relics, and I was allowed to touch them. It was really beautiful. It's like this beautiful warehouse, and all of these elements, whether it was the crosses, the nails, because the thieves, ironically, the third thief, the one who wasn't very cooperative, not the one that was, the other one that he said, we will be with thee in heaven tonight.
Right.
The other one. The other one was actually there, and his job was to guardian the relics of the crucifixion. So he took me on this tour through this whole place. There were all sorts of things. It was the nails, the crosses. There were statues, like the stations of the cross were placed. They were like images held in time. There were paintings. There were all of these things were like held in the deepest purple. There was this purple, it's hard to express, but I think there's a reason why the royalty, the idea of royalty, became associated with the color of purple, the deep purple, because that purple is actually in these higher spheres, has to do with the Christ royalty. It's a different kind of royal line.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, now on the other side, you've talked about these beautiful places. It seems like whether it was Buddha or Jesus or anything, it was all peaceful, right?
Well, no.
Okay. All right. So that was my next question.
No, I mean, no. I had, I've got just as much to share about the spiritual warfare and learning about good and evil and the battles that I had to go through. Not only the battles, literally spiritual warfare, but also the battles within my own soul of, identifying and removing the rot and the things that were within me that I didn't originally see, that I had to change and alter.
Is that just because Marilyn? Is that because we're human and we're going to be sinners and we're not perfect? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. However, this is where we're talking about the path of purification, which was talked about in that Egyptian text as well, which is that the purpose of us being in this sort of realm is to undergo that purification, which is that we are to recognize the light and the dark within ourselves. And so we have to actually go in and transform those things within ourselves which is not compatible to light. That's the purpose of why we're here. We have to be made compatible to an all-holy God. And so we actually have to do more of the work than I think, and a lot of that is through grace. It's, by allowing grace to come in, and this happens a lot in terms of the out-of-body experience. This is the vibrations that people receive. These are the way that grace manifests. This is how people are changed. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One question is, are you always aware of where you are when you have these out-of-body experiences? Do you remember everything, or sometimes do you not?
A lot of times you don't, and especially for those who are just beginning. For me, I remember a lot, but there are still a lot of times I don't. And there's always a purpose for that, because there are things sometimes that are working under the conscious that are not ready to come to conscious yet. And there are always things that may be going on that we may not be able to recall here in this physical waking life, because to do so would not be beneficial for our progress here. You know what I'm saying?
Of course, yeah, Marilyn. I'm going to ask you a question. So, what is
Sure.
your physical body? So, the body, as if I was looking at you, what is that body doing when you are having this out-of-body travel experience?
Yeah, nice.
The body ends up going into a very deep state of sleep. And so I'm always recommending to people when they're doing their meditations to lie down, because you want to be in a position where if the spirit is going to attempt to leave the body, that your body doesn't fall down, because that's going to break the trance that's allowing for that to happen. So I always recommend lying down, yes, because your body's going to be in a deep state of spiritual sleep.
That's interesting. But Marilyn, let me ask you one more thing. You talked about some of the great things. You talked about the struggles that you've had. Can you specifically tell me one out-of-body experience that you wished you didn't see or you wanted to leave from?
Oh my gosh, I have a lot of those, to be honest with you.
What would shock the listener to find out that you've seen?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
What would shock the listener to find out that you have witnessed?
Oh gosh. Oh man, I would. I'll shock your listeners. I'm sorry. I travel into the hell realms.
Oh,
and one night I was taken into a realm which is called the consumers of children realm.
Oh my God.
I had been working with the souls of pedophiles and people who harm children. And in the universal justice, there is pretty much not much worse you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And this place was awful. It was so hideous. And the souls of those who had been sentenced there, they were like these large beetle bugs, I'd say 4 or 5 feet across. Their tops were like green. going across. They had these icky, nasty legs. They had to be close to the ground because they were the scum of the earth.
Oh, my God.
And the realm itself was pure mud, and the mud was mixed with feces and urine and all matter of stench and corruption, because that's what they were. So they had to have their faces in the corruption at all times. And at one point, one of the consumers of children tried to look up at me, and there were these guardians there. The guardians in that realm were faceless beings who were merciless in keeping them under control. And they were not allowed to look up. So literally they were beheaded. But, they were these big, ugly bugs. And
and you said they weren't allowed to look up. What would happen if they looked up?
They got beheaded.
But,
they wouldn't die because they're in a hell realm.
Right.
So they would lose and then it would grow back, but they would learn, you do not look up unless, Now, one of the things you have to remember, and this is hard to explain in just a short period of time, but my journeys in these lower hell realms and in the purgatorial realms, I learned about how souls move through these places. And a lot of my work there, not in this particular realm and not this particular time, was to go in and help souls when they were ready to make a change and go a little higher. I would assume that option would be available to these souls as well if there was genuine change in them. I did not go there for that purpose.
Right.
We were dealing with a particular predator for which judgment was being rendered at that moment, who had done a lot of hideous things. And it's weird because I've seen horrific demons, literally, they're reptilian, they have bug-like fingers, and some of them literally are covered in bugs, like tarantulas and creatures that slither, and, stirring up a cauldron and fire all around them. But the hell realm for the consumers of children was worse than any of that.
Wow.
It was so awful, and I think part of it was, when you describe it, it doesn't sound as bad as it was. Part of it was you could feel the putrid. It wasn't just smelling it and seeing what they had become. It was feeling what they had done. It was, you could feel the severity, the consequence, the hideousness of what they had done. They had done some really horrible things. These were child murderers and people who are, serial killers of children and horrible things. And, these are unrepentant sinners, and they were, in the hell realms, in the purgatorial realms, there are always these guardians because they have to keep them inside their domain so that they do not go where they're not compatible. So in this particular realm, there were these dark-robed beings who had no faces, and they were the ones who made sure that these creatures, or whatever you call it, had to stay there. And they were the ones who would also, if they tried to do anything outside of the bounds of what they were allowed, would take care of it. In this case, they would be beheaded.
Oh my God! Wow.
But they're a bug, so it's a bug head.
Yeah, of course. Wow. Thank you for this, Marilyn. This is so interesting. I know Cap's got a question, and I got one more.
Okay.
I mean, this is incredible. I can't wait to get you back on the air because we're almost out of time. But Cap, I know you had something you wanted to ask.
Yeah, Marilyn. So I have to ask you. So when you wake up out of this, I guess you would call it a sleep paralysis when you're having one of these visions, and if you're, like you were telling me, you're experiencing these horrible smells, you're experiencing these horrible, I guess, vibes, you would say, when you are going through this. When you wake up and you're walking around your house as if, nothing actually happened, are you impacted?
Oh, yeah.
Afterwards?
If I come back from a spiritual warfare or something dark like that, when I wake up, I will turn on every light in the house. I'll usually go around and light up incense because I got to get it out of my system. And also similarly, when I come out of the really beautiful experiences, the heavenly ones, I'm just kind of like swooning all day, So it's both. I wrote another book called Fragrance Mysticism, which actually talks about, some of the greatest mystics. If you read their writings, they always talked about these sweet fragrances and aromas. With St. Padre Pio, people would smell roses around him. So we have this tradition for thousands of years in the ancient texts that show that there were always the fragrances of different kinds of flowers around things that were holy, and yet there were the putrid stenches around those that were defiled.
Wow. Marilyn, you have blown us away today. Guys, I'm speaking with Marilyn Hughes with my co-host, Capriana, and Marilyn Hughes will be in the book Simply Amazing Women. She is the out-of-body travel author who has authored over 90 books, but the one that we were talking about earlier today was Comparative Religious Mystical Theology, Out-of-Body Travel and World Religions, and you can get more information if you go to outofbodytravel.org. Marilyn, wow, I am blown away today. That was pretty incredible. I thank you for your honesty, and wow, that's something that people will be talking about, right, Kev?
I couldn't agree more, Casey.
You're welcome, and I appreciate the conversation. It's been it's nice to have both of you today. That was awesome.
Yeah, you knocked it out of the park. So we'll be talking to you probably in a couple of weeks here, but let's let people digest this one because this one was incredible. Marilyn, you're definitely one of the world's most amazing people, and I can't wait to hear what you got to say next.
Thank you, Casey, and thanks, Cap.
Thanks, Marilyn.
All right, take care.